We'll begin. My name is Daniel Simmons. I'm the Vice President for Policy at the Institute for Energy Research and the American Energy Alliance here in Washington. The Institute for Energy Research is a 501c3. Just to explain the difference between these two organizations, as in what the 501c3 does education, the American Energy Alliance, that's a 501c4 that does the activism that actively opposes or supports legislation. Just for a little bit of background about what the two organizations are. But with both organizations, we do one thing, which is energy, promoting free market policies in energy. Because, as we have seen over the past few years, the free markets in energy have created a massive boom in oil and gas development in the U.S., a boom that has nothing to do with the federal government, even though President Obama would like to take credit. And those are all because of property rights. That's all because of free markets. It's all because of responsible regulation, as opposed to what you get on federal lands. And so those are the reasons that we support free markets. And let me see if, by the way, if someone could do me a favor and set an alarm, so 25 minutes from now, the alarm would go off and I know, hey, I've been up for 25 minutes, we have 25 minutes left. That would be, if someone could do that, it would be much appreciated. So when talking about energy, and by the way, if you have a question, please ask. I could talk for a long, long time. I have a presentation. It is the outline of what I want to talk about, but I'm here for you guys. So if you have a question as we're going along, please ask it. I think that would probably work better than saving them up for the end. Yes.
And then maybe to get to it, there's all the talk about our infrastructure, our power grid. If it goes down, how vulnerable we are with the power grid.
Okay.
And I was talking to my husband, has a degree in electrical engineering, his master's in that from a long time ago. But what he's trying to alleviate my concerns with all the talk about going down the power grid, we're all going to die. He said the power grid has not always been connected. Things have not always been connected. He said the basic parts are all still there that operate separately. So if something were, so I'm just wondering, how does all that kind of interact and work together?
Okay, that's a very good question. We'll get to it. We'll get to issues of electricity issues, because, and I wish I had a slide that showed what it is.
Just kind of put things back, the things that are not connected, he said that those are still there, still work, and so they'll just kind of go back to being the separate.
Okay, well, so
I just want to say, if you're going to ask a question, maybe you can stand up and kind of chart a little bit.
we will have, two things on that. One, I'll have a microphone here because they're recording it, and so they can get it on tape. But he's going to take care of making sure the microphone works because it didn't work for the first question. I don't know if I messed it up. And so the question is about electricity and the electricity grid. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is about oil and gas, and then talk about electricity, so make sure that I get back to that question, because one of the problems is we talk about this stuff. It's like, oh yeah, the electricity grid. Well, what the heck is the electricity grid? And I wish I had a slide that showed that precisely, but we'll discuss that. And for the people that just came in, when you have a question, please ask, and we'll pass around the microphone to make sure that everyone can hear you. So the place that I start when talking about these issues, the issues of energy, are really a lot of places that you see attacks on energy, and that is on environmental issues, especially when you're talking about oil, coal, natural gas. So here is a chart that EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, puts out every single year. What it shows is, since 1970 or from 1980, whichever year you want to start from, they put out two versions of it. This one's from 1970. Gross domestic product over that time has, skyrocketed up. Vehicle miles traveled has gone a long way up. As the people are driving more, the economy has grown, population's up, energy consumption's up, CO2 emissions are up. But the most important thing is this. And what isn't on this chart is that our use of coal has essentially doubled over that time period. Coal, this incredibly dirty fuel that they would like you to believe, pollution emissions are down 70%. And that is total pollution emissions are down 70%. As in, we're doing more, the environment's getting cleaner. And part of the reason that the environment is getting cleaner is because growing the economy means that we can spend more on some pollution controls. That's a good thing. And it isn't just since 1970. This is a graph that shows the improvement since 1990. I remember 1990. Many of you in this room remember 1990. I didn't think 1990 was a time of that it was like an environmental hellhole in 1990. Like it wasn't maybe like 1970 where you had really bad smog, for example. And even since 1970, you have carbon monoxide that's down 76%, sulfur dioxide that's down 76%, nitrogen dioxide. Like these pollutants are down a long way, including ozone, which is down 23% in that time period. So the point is, the air is getting cleaner, even since 1990. That it continues to get better.
Yeah, so my question is, that downward trend is great, and if you're on the left, I would think you would say that's because of environmental regulations that EPA or somebody has put out there. How much of it is due to that? How much of it is due to industry and just people living cleaner or whatever on their own?
That's a good question, and it's very difficult to disentangle. Well, the amount that is due to EPA's regulation and the amount that is due to increased efficiency and entrepreneurship in this sort of thing, and it's due to both. And unfortunately, you cannot disentangle it. However, just because that some is due to EPA doesn't mean that EPA is necessarily necessarily the only reason that the pollution has improved. Pollution levels were going down before 1970 when EPA was created. They were going down because individual cities, individual states were taking certain actions, and then the program became federalized. This is no surprise. Now EPA wants to then claim all the credit for everything that's happened since 1970, and that's just incorrect, since we were on a downward trend with pollution even before EPA was created. So it's a question. Some of it's undoubtedly due to EPA's regulations. Then again, there's other ways that the same improvements that could have happened at far less cost. And this is the other point that I like to make about talking about natural resources, particularly energy, is that time. Time is the ultimate non-renewable resource. As in, you guys, we're all here together. We're spending time together today. This is time that we can't get back. Once it's gone for good. That's not the case. Like, there's no such thing as substitutes for this time. We made certain choices. We're here today. That when it comes to people saying, hey, if we run out of oil or whatever, or run out of natural gas, the point there is that at least there's substitution. At least you can substitute one form of energy for another form of energy. With people's time, when it's gone, it's gone. So we should make sure that how we treat time is incredibly important, because it is the ultimate non-renewable resource. And that matters because the prices of anything, but particularly since we're talking about energy today, the price of energy, an important part of the price is people's time that is required to create the product, to get that product to you. That's why it's one of the most important reasons why lower priced stuff is more efficient, because there's less of people's time in it. There's less of that non-renewable resource. However, what you get these days is a lot of talking about, hey, we need to have these energy efficiency standards. Well, if you have energy efficiency standards that drive up the cost, that drive up the time that it requires to use something, that should really be a problem. If you have a dishwasher that instead of taking 40 minutes to wash your dishes takes 2.5 hours, which is reality, your time can be wasted by the energy efficiency standard. And that, to me, is a real problem because we're wasting an important non-renewable resource. I'm not saying that energy efficiency isn't important. It's really important. But the point is that who should be making those decisions are not bureaucrats in D.C., but they are, you and me. So, getting into the actual sources of energy. These are the sources of energy in 2003. The 2014 data will be out in about a month. The energy that we use the most of is petroleum. Over 1/3 of the total energy we used is petroleum. The rest of this is almost exclusively for electricity generation, the rest of it. Other than natural gas. Natural gas is a combination transportation and electricity generation and home heating. Mostly home heating and electricity generation. But petroleum is a transportation fuel. Duh. We all know that. However, there's some people, particularly a few years ago, that were trying to promote electricity mandates, saying that these are ways to save oil. The ways that we should mandate the use of renewable electricity because that would mean we're importing less oil. Only about 1% of our electricity is generated from oil. In the mid-2000s, this is what, over time, 1950, 2008, this is what the U.S. oil production looked like. This is what the trend was, which, it increased through 1970, and then it looked ugly, honestly. And it particularly looked ugly since it spiked again in the 1980s, and it was, all downhill. It looks bad. You remember in about 2008, that was about the time that Sarah Palin said, drill, baby, drill, and was roundly mocked by the intelligentsia, saying, oh no, the U.S. just does not have enough oil. We don't have enough of the world's oil reserves. You can't just drill our way to lower oil prices. In 2005, President Bush passed the Renewable Fuel Standard, which mandates a certain amount of ethanol gets blended in transportation fuels, updated in 2007, which included some far more ridiculous plans saying that we need to use cellulosic ethanol. That's not ethanol from corn, but ethanol from like woody plants and things that you can do, but is very expensive and is expensive today. Started also working on about fuel economy mandates for cars. The Obama administration took that up and ran like crazy with it. And then nearly 30 states passed renewable electricity mandates. As I said, the petroleum and our use of imported oil was one of the reasons that people gave for passing these, even though it was not a good argument then, it's not a good argument now. And oh, look, what happened? Since 2008, our oil production is up over 80%, which is an absolutely astonishing, it's mind-blowing. I mean, obviously, I talk about this stuff, I care about this stuff. That I knew there was capacity in the United States to have a lot more oil production. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There's a lot more opportunities offshore. There's a lot more opportunities on federal lands, for example, onshore, such as Anwar in Alaska. This didn't happen because of any of that. And just to kind of put this in perspective, this is a chart that came from a statistical report that BP puts out every year. These are the largest oil production increases by, the 10 largest oil production increases of all time. 2013, these are the 10 largest. United States, 2013, that was a very nice increase of about, I don't know, what is that? That's about 1.2 million barrels a day. And then 2014 was the 4th largest. And it's obvious the other country on the list is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is obviously the giant of oil production, even though this year we should surpass Saudi Arabia's oil production. And the point is that they did it all with very easy to access oil. That's the point of oil in Saudi Arabia. It's easy to access. What happened in the US is a completely different story. And the same sort of story is happening with natural gas. Since 1970, our natural gas production was almost flat through, it really was flat through about 2006. That's why at about that time they started talking about importing natural gas to the U.S., and that's really what we needed. In fact, there was a group the group started called the Center for Natural Gas, and the point of the group is to help import natural gas. They now are wanting to export natural gas. Their mission has been flipped on its head in just a few years because, well, you have this 33% increase, and unlike oil, which is a globally traded commodity, natural gas, the U.S. is self-sufficient in natural gas. We don't export very much. We don't import hardly any. There's a little tiny bit that goes back and forth to Mexico and Canada, but that's it. So when you have 33% increase, you're going to get lower prices because it's difficult to use all that new natural gas so fast. And natural gas, one of the great things about natural gas that people don't necessarily realize is how natural gas is used. It's not just used as heating for our homes or for electricity generation. Yeah, we know that. But also it's used, the molecules themselves are used to make fertilizers, to make pharmaceuticals, to make plastics. I mean, that also oil is also used a lot to make plastics through the refining process. So that one of the things that all of this natural gas gives the U.S. is, a great opportunity for, additional manufacturing that we didn't have a few years ago because it really looked like we're going to see very high natural gas prices. Instead, we have dirt cheap natural gas prices. And this is, this is a great success story. And of course, the president would like to take credit for it. Anyway, well, I love this part. We're doing it so fast. We're growing our natural gas and oil production so fast that 2 years ago, I set the goal. Thanks, President. I'm sure you had a lot to do with this. I set the goal to cut our oil imports in half by 2020, and we'll meet that goal this year. Rah, rah. So how the heck did this happen? Because, it's no secret to you guys that President Obama isn't exactly a friend of oil and gas production. And it happens because of oil and natural gas that comes from shale formations. This is a map. Yes, ma'am.
It's not because of the Shale Plays, it's because there was a gas market that was released that allowed innovation and technology. That is the reason we have the Shale Plays. If you just go to the fact that, we found these reserves, aren't we lucky? You're missing the story that should be told in this room to conservatives, is that natural gas was heavily regulated in the 70s. Wellhead control, they were removed, markets play, pipelines were pushed out of the way to just be a deliverer of gas so that there was competition, and that drove innovation, that drove exploration, where we had reserves that was never expected in the 70s or the 80s because we were being told there was shortage. Cut to the chase and let's tell the story of competition and free markets.
Thank you. Thank you. And that is all true. And that's in a few slides. The issue of, because really one of the main points here of these shale plays is where they are, and where the most important ones are. Such as the Marcellus Shale, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Eagle Ford Shale, Texas, crosses the border into Mexico. How much production is there of oil from the Eagle Ford Shale in Mexico? Nothing. How much is there in Texas? Over 1 million barrels a day. Oh, geez, do you think it's an invisible line in the ground that is causing this to happen? No. And it has everything to do with the things that she said, as in its competition, its property rights, its regulation, as in regulation that makes sense, as opposed to regulation on federal lands. In Texas, you can get a permit to drill in less than 5 days. On federal lands, it's going to take you more than 200 days. And that's just the permit. That's not the rest of the hoops that you have to jump through. So that's why you have the Eagle Ford Shale here in Texas, where you're able to produce a heck of a lot of oil, as well as some natural gas. Also, you have the Bakken Formation up here in North Dakota. Again, it's all private land. You might see some other shale formations out here in areas of the country where there's much more federal land. There's not as much going on there. You also have, this is shale oil. There's also this stuff called oil shale that is completely different. This shale is rock, and it's extracting oil and natural gas out of rock. Oil shale is not exactly, it's more like a gooey substance called kerogen. That is almost all on federal land, which is why there's no production. The point here, as she was making, is that the reason that this is happening is because of competition. The reason this is happening is because of private property rights. And that is 100%, that's 100% accurate. The technology, which is, there are three technologies that go together to make this happen. Hydraulic fracturing, directional drilling, as well as 3D imaging, so high-tech imaging technology. Because what happens is shale is a rock. And geologists have known for years that there is oil and natural gas in the rock, but like, so what? It doesn't matter if you know it's there if you can't get it out, efficiently. So on these private lands, people have been able to experiment. People have been able to figure out the technology. And what they do is they drill down vertically thousands of feet, 10,000 feet, 14,000 feet, and then somehow, and I don't understand how they do it, they're able to get the drill to go sideways so that, first of all, with the imaging, they know exactly where they want to go. They know, the depths they want to go. They think that they know what's down there. They're then able to drill down and drill horizontally with horizontal drilling technology, again, all developed on, private lands. And then they're able to fracture the rock with small explosives and then with high-pressure water to extract out the oil. Again, this is, if you remember from a few charts back about the increase of production, the horizontal wells, you see how that they're increasing over time as more and more of this production is coming from these shale formations. And this was the slide that I was thinking about, is that there is one place in the world where this hydraulic fracturing revolution is occurring. It isn't just the US. It isn't even, you could say, yes, it's the US. That's not accurate because it's not on federal lands. It's happening on private and state lands. Why? Property rights, because property owners are able to decide. They're the ones making decisions as opposed to bureaucrats a few miles away. They have access to the resource so that you can experiment, so that you can figure out how in the world are we going to get oil and gas out of this, out of this rock. And then the state regulations, as I mentioned, 5 days in Texas, or 20 to 30 days to get a permit to drill in North Dakota, or more than 200 days on federal lands. That's why you have oil and gas production that is, this is, well, I guess it's 2009 through 2013, so it's a little bit different years. Since 2008, oil production's up 80%. From 2009, it's up 61%. And the point is here, on federal lands where you have to deal with the federal government, oil and natural gas production is down. And the key is here, too, that oil was $100 a barrel through much of this time. $100 a barrel. Why in the world, when there is billions of barrels of oil on federal lands, is oil production dropping when you have very high oil prices? Well, it doesn't have anything to do with where the actual stuff is, whether the resource is there. It has everything to do with, can you access the resource? When President Obama came into office, this green, yes, Ken? Okay, thank you. This was all open. All the areas that were green were open. He could have leased any of it. This is what is open today. Only like north of Alaska, and even though Shell has spent $6 billion to try to drill for oil, they have been not allowed to actually drill for oil yet. Apparently my what's that? True, and the Gulf of Mexico, but essentially West Coast, East Coast, off limits. And the same thing is true onshore. I don't have a map of that, but here are permits over time. And you see why President Reagan, an average of 8,000 permits, and then sadly you cannot tell a difference between party. And my presentation is running away with itself. I wonder if there's a way to turn off whatever timings it's running on. Anyway, you can't tell which party people are, but President Clinton would be a heck of a lot better than President Obama when it comes to production onshore. And why does this stuff matter? Why does it matter about being able to go look? Why does it matter? Why does private property rights matter? Well, here is the Alaska OCS, Alaska offshore, and the estimates of how much oil they think there is. In 1996 to 2011, the estimates didn't change. Why? Well, they didn't allow anyone to go look. Here's the Gulf of Mexico, and that is federal, but at least on the Gulf of Mexico, you can go look. In 1996, there was 8.5 billion barrels of oil, they thought. Today, they think there's 48 billion barrels. Well, that's not even today. That's 4 years ago. In other words, in those 15 years, the amount of oil they thought was there sextupled. Why? Because you can look. When you look, you can find. The same thing is onshore. In the Marcellus Shale, they thought there was 2 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in 2002. 2011, 84. They believe there's 84 trillion cubic feet. And so what are the threats that we're seeing to this oil and gas boom? It's EPA's regulation of methane emissions. EPA cannot regulate hydraulic fracturing. That's regulated by the states because it's the regulation of groundwater. The BLM, that's the part of the Department of Interior that regulates federal lands. They want to regulate hydraulic fracturing on federal lands. And then you have slow walking of permits. Have you heard of the Keystone XL pipeline, for example?
Yes, Obama just within a couple of days ago helped with the pipeline in Africa.
Yeah, well, don't expect intellectual consistency from these guys. The point is that these are the threats. You could produce it, but if you can't move it, and that's one way that they're working on stopping production. Anyway, we'll get to electricity. By the way, Ken Malloy at the back of the room knows more about electricity than I will ever know. So please correct me, Ken, if you have anything. We recently came out with a project called the storyofelectricity.org that tries to explain electricity, because here's the problem with electricity, is it's complex. And but for us as the consumers, all we do is we get a bill once a month. We hardly even look at it. It was like, oh, I guess I should use less electricity. Oh, I guess wow, we really ran the air conditioning last month. We better hold off next month, You might look and see, the cost of electricity is 12 cents a kilowatt hour. That's the average price in the US. But more than that, you're like, okay. But there is a concerted attack coming from Washington to federalize the electrical grid. As I mentioned before, all of these, this is the same chart from earlier about how we use our energy, where we get it from. Petroleum, more than 1/3, and then natural gas, coal, nuclear, biomass. The rest of that is all electricity, and here's where electricity generation comes from. Number one is coal. When the 2014 numbers come out, it'll be lower. I'm not sure how much lower, maybe 30, I doubt it'll be 35%, but it's decreasing over time. 10 years ago, it was pretty much half of our electricity generation came from coal. Natural gas, nuclear. Here are the sources of electricity generation that the president likes to subsidize. You have wind right here. You have solar right there. The Department of Interior just announced that they were really concentrating on allowing solar and other renewable development on 2 million acres in the deserts of California. However, at the same time, they want to designate 12 million acres of wilderness in Alaska to forestall the opportunity to drill oil, even though that would take place on 2,000 acres. So it's fine to industrialize 2 million acres in California, but heaven forbid if you drilled on 2,000 acres in offshore, not offshore, but onshore in Alaska. And the electrical grid is under attack, and the question earlier about what is the electrical grid, I have some copies of this on the back table back there, if anybody wants it. This is a report that we just released. So first of all, let's step back because of the question from earlier, is that, like, what is the electrical grid? And, the electrical grid is the most, it's probably the U.S. electrical grid is the world's largest machine, okay? It connects not only generators, there's the part that is generation. Those are power plants. I don't think you can, I think it's up the river a little bit. There was used to be a coal-fired power plant right on the Potomac that you could see. They're switching over to natural gas. But the first step is generation. So we have coal generators, natural gas generators, you have nuclear generators. Then it's like there's high voltage transmission that, everybody knows what high voltage transmission lines look like. That takes it to local areas where the amount of voltage is decreased to be a bit safer. And then it gets transmitted to all of our houses. And so the point is that you have a grid that runs from, it's interconnected from us all the way to electrical generators. And the point is that there are various regions of the country there's essentially 3 electrical grids throughout the U.S. There's a Western interconnection, Eastern interconnection, and Texas. Of course, Texas has their own electrical grid. There's some small interconnections between them, but they're not great. Well, I don't know, they're not great. They are great, but there's small interconnections. But essentially, there's 3 large electrical grids in the country. And the way that those are regulated is they're regulated at the state level and and at a regional level by these regional RTOs, which I'm spacing on what that means, but. Thank you. Regional transmission organizations. And they're the ones that decide which generators to turn on, which generators to turn off to keep the grid stable, because, let me see if that's the next slide. It's not, but the whole point is that the trouble with electricity is that electricity has to be used, or that supply and demand have to meet at all times. Yes, well.
I'm sorry, I'm going to embarrass my husband, but I do work for Dominion.
Uh-huh.
This is my second one.
But if you think of the grid, first it started to serve the city, right, the town. So that's your distribution grid. And they're very small wire, not very high voltage. That's one, and the state regulates that. That's your Dominion utility. That's your Pepco utility, right? Your Connecticut Power and Light utility. But they, as they grew, started to interconnect and put in high transmission wires. You located your generation outside the town, so you have higher transmission. And because they cross state lines, and because they sell power to the utility, or then that was wholesale, and that's interstate commerce, so federal government regulates that. So when you talk about the grid, you got to think in two physical aspects. The distribution system, which is your utility, and then the big wires that transmits the power from the generator, like he said, to the utility, and that will interconnect with other utilities because you're balancing between different of the distribution systems. So you have 2 jurisdictional parts to the grid. Now, what has happened in some jurisdictions is the generators are no longer owned by the utility. I don't know how many of you live in Virginia, but the utility owns that generation. But what FERC did is say that we're going to control, like he said, the RTOs. We're going to have a competitive market run by the RTO for which power goes into your distribution grid. So there's where he's probably going to start talking about how the EPA threatens that wholesale market and how the power is going to get sold to your utility. But always keep in mind the distribution grid is separate, and all of the major wires that connect all of that is under federal control.
All right, thank you. That was very good for what the electrical grid, for what the electrical grid is, because it's simple. We rely on it every day, and yet we don't ever think about, how in the world it works. Yes, sir.
So, stepping back for a minute, I know in 2013, 2014, U.S. and Mexico had passed the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which helped in terms of some energy independence happening to the Western Gap, I know, in the Gulf. And then since then, we've also started to work with Mexico. I know in Arizona there was a line that was created for a smaller grid, and that there's been talk if we were to go forward with the new, there would be a much larger grid cooperation with the U.S. and Mexico, and that the new grid would be capable of handling more energy and also the new grid would be capable of handling more energy and also would be good at avoiding cybersecurity threats and blackouts. Is it worth the risk because it is a renewable source to try to tap into this potential, especially because it would help our energy independence in terms of staying in North America?
Well, when it comes to energy independence and electricity, the U.S. is completely energy independent. All of our resources, if we go back here, like all of this stuff is American. Like coal, it's mined here, generated here. Natural gas, nuclear, everything here is American. Like you have completely.
Don't forget Canada.
Well, okay, good point. Don't forget Canada. Don't forget a little bit of Mexico. But really, because the U.S., especially the Eastern interconnection, interconnects with Canada. That because, I don't remember the percentage, but 80 to 90% of Canadians live within 100 miles of the U.S. border. So the electrical grids are interconnected with the Canadians. I don't know about the interconnection with Mexico. The point is, interconnections generally tying our trading back and forth with Mexico is generally a good thing, I think. The transboundary agreement is a good thing. I testified in favor of that a couple of times before Congress. It's not a ton of oil, but the point is that the greater interconnections we have with Canada, in particular, that means that we have a more robust electricity grid, generally speaking. The problem is what EPA wants to do with electricity generation. And that, let me make one quick point, and that is that from the study that's on the back that we recently released, 10 minutes left, by the way, there are 130 gigawatts of generation that are scheduled to go offline. To put, the number doesn't mean anything to anyone, other than 130 gigawatts is enough electricity for 1/3 of all Americans. As in, that is how much that's how much it could generate. So we're talking about a heck of a lot of electricity. That's really the point. And the problem is that what they want to replace that with is renewables, which, the problem there is that they're unreliable. That what they call it is they're not dispatchable. They don't have a switch. You can't turn them on, you can't turn them off, which is really a problem because the point with electricity is balance. The point is keeping the grid in balance. You have to have your demand that is, you have to have supply that is meeting demand at all times. There aren't like these giant batteries out there. There could be, but they're incredibly expensive to be able to. So when electricity is produced, it then is used at the same time. And of course, the administration is promoting massive subsidies for wind. Yeah, I'm 2 questions behind now. I'll start with yours.
Okay, I follow the Agenda 21, United Nations kind of concept, and since I kind of follow that, I've started looking at everything the EPA does through the prism of implementing Agenda 21. And to me, them withdrawing, because it's about controlling everything. And I'm just wondering, to either support my theory or good or bad, how much of this really is EPA implementing Agenda 21 for the sake of implementing Agenda 21?
Yeah, I can't necessarily speak to that. What I can say is this: what these regulations are doing, and especially what the regulation of greenhouse gases from existing generators does, is it means that it is a federalization of the electricity sector. It is a federalization of the decisions that they would make at local levels, of which sources of electricity will be required to generate. As in, they're taking a whole bunch of stuff offline, and they then want to switch from what is economic dispatch, in other words, what makes the most economic sense, and switch and say, well, we think these generators should produce because of environmental considerations. It really is a federalization of electricity generation. And in that sense, it is definitely accurate that what EPA and the administration are doing is exercising much greater federal control over the electricity grid at the state and local, well, regional, state, and local level. I mean, well, yes, because
What do you think we can do to stop it?
yes, there is. Let me get to that. Yes.
I've been told that renewables like wind and solar can never replace a single fossil fuel generating plant, because when the wind stops blowing and the sun goes down, those plants have to be available to turn on instantly to replace that energy. So no matter how much you double or triple or quadruple wind and solar, how can you eliminate any of those current generating plants?
You can't. And that's what this chart, this is from the Northwest. The Northwestern United States has a lot of wind. They don't necessarily have a ton of demand. It's called the BPA, the Bonneville Power Administration Balancing Authority. And I downloaded this yesterday. The blue is the electrical demand over the course of the day. What's interesting up there is they have 2 peaks over the course of a day, in the morning and then in the afternoon. And what you see is, so, in the morning, I believe that it's in the morning, there's a peak as people get up, people start using electricity, and then decreases, and then as people go home, they turn on their TVs, they do, whatever they're doing around the house, there's another peak, because this is over the course of 1 week. And here's the thing, so you see that going on, and, at all times, the grid operator has to turn on generators, they have to get electricity from somewhere, they have a lot of hydro, so it's not super difficult, but you see what wind is doing here. Wind sometimes is blowing a lot, sometimes it's blowing not at all. It didn't blow at all for essentially 2 days in a place with a decent amount of wind generation. So the problem is that you might put all the wind that you want in an area. If the wind doesn't blow, you don't have anything. You have no electricity. And that's the point. And that's why that wind cannot really displace fossil fuel generators. Solar could a little bit, but solar, there are some, then again, frequently the peak in electricity comes after the sun has gone down. So solar isn't necessarily a magic bullet either.
But they're projecting commercial deployment of battery capability within the next 5 or 10 years. And that's where they rest their case on your renewable energy.
What batteries?
Pardon?
You're going to have gigantic batteries?
Yes.
Not too deep.
No, but her point is that they've been projecting that every 5 years. 25 years.
California has a 300 gigawatt battery requirement that the utilities have to deploy. 300 gigawatts of battery by 2020. So they're pushing this commercial deployment. If we get batteries, a lot of this, particularly solar, is going to work. Now, the question is, does that really, it solves the variability problem, but does that solve
Well, and cost is a huge issue. The cost of the batteries is a huge issue. The disposing of battery, like they're gigantic issues to the cost. We'll see. And this is the point. This is why I believe in free markets, okay? I don't know what the future holds, and I think it is very important to be humble about what the future holds. I did not project to see rocketing U.S. oil and gas production. I thought that such things could be possible, but I didn't project that. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. You could have magic batteries, and we could have a whole bunch more solar and wind than we have today, because it could make sense. The point is that we are closing generators that are low cost, and we're replacing them with generators that are higher cost. As in, we're taking a whole bunch of, the analogy is, you have a used car, it's a perfectly good used car, you paid it off, and it runs. It's just, your car's just going. And you're replacing that perfectly serviceable automobile with a brand new, shiny car that might get a little bit better gas mileage, but you know what? It's still more expensive than your good, your 5-year-old Toyota Camry, for example. And you're replacing that with a brand new Toyota Camry. Which one is more cost effective? Well, the 5-year-old one, because you paid it off. And that's the reality. So where can you get more information? This is a publication that we have coming out soon that talks about all kinds of energy issues called Hard Facts. Just got this back yesterday from the graphic designer. And here are the important points to remember. The environment is getting cleaner. Don't believe it when people say that things are always getting worse. The U.S. has vast oil and gas potential. The stability of the electric grid is under attack because they're closing the plants that are affordable. They're closing the plants that are reliable, moving to a system that has a lot less reliability. And because of that, we're going to see higher electricity prices, without a doubt. Electricity prices in Europe are about 3 times what they are here. If you're a manufacturer, where would you rather be, the U.S. or Europe? I think it's pretty obvious. Places to get more information. Our websites, globalwarming.org, are friends that, particularly for global warming information, but also on global warming policy. And that's from our friends at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. The Cato Institute has the best information that I know of in terms of global warming. That gets at what the science says and what it means, and how the Obama administration is dishonest about their claims. Chip Knappenberger and Pat Michaels do great work, and the Heritage Foundation is also very, very good. But contact me, and there's many. They asked for 5, which is why I included 5. You could have many more. So if you have questions, please contact me. Yeah. We're out of time, and on that note,
One thing, I thank the EPA for giving her something to be mad at than me.
And the last point, and this is what she was saying, is this bullet point right here. There are, this is one of the ways to push back are for states to assert their authority to control the electrical grid, to regulate the electrical grid in their states. No state should pass a plan to comply with EPA's regulations without the state legislators signing off on it, without your elected officials signing off on it. Because the problem is that a lot of times the public utility commissions, they go along to get along. They go along with the utilities, and the utilities aren't always our friends, because if they can pass on the costs, they're going to pass on the costs. So what matters is to comply with EPA regulations. What we need is, the state legislators should vote on it, should vote on complying with this plan, because it is a huge, huge problem. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Yes, ma'am.